This presentation will outline the process of researching and writing a dissertation. It is aimed at master's level students, but the principles may be helpful to students who have to write dissertations as part of their undergraduate degrees. Before doing any planning or writing, it's important to find the answers to some questions. With a big piece of work like a dissertation, you can save yourself a lot of time by asking these questions at an early stage. Who is my dissertation supervisor? When is the final deadline? And what is the dissertation word limit? Once you have the answers to these questions, you can think about choosing a topic. Choosing a topic can be daunting. It's important to select something that will sustain your interest. The topic should also be manageable. Avoid choosing a problem that researchers have spent many years trying to solve. You're aiming to produce a brief research project in a short timescale, rather than a PhD thesis or a life's work. Start by thinking about the modules on your course. Is there an area of research that has raised some interesting questions or that you really enjoyed studying? Once you've thought of something, jot down some possible research questions. Try to make these look like essay titles. For example, to what extent are the government offering support to the children of substance misusers? Play about with a range of titles until you've found a couple of options that you think might work. You are likely to have around 6 months to complete your dissertation, but you may be writing it alongside other commitments. It's important to be realistic about what you can achieve in the available time. Make sure you've considered the following things. Can I achieve my goals before the deadline? Are there any costs associated with the research, and can I meet these? Will I need to travel to the research site, and is this feasible? Can I get access to the research site? Your supervisor is likely to be a very useful source of support throughout the dissertation process. He or she is likely to be very knowledgeable about your topic, and he or she will have supervised many students and can offer helpful advice. At your first meeting, take along your proposed research questions. Don't worry if these seem basic or not very impressive. They will act as a starting point for discussion and will help your supervisor to see where your interests lie. Ask whether your question is workable and whether it can be improved. Ask for some ideas about where to start with the reading. Write down what your supervisor says so that you can remember the advice later. And keep in touch with your supervisor throughout the dissertation process. Supervisors are very keen to help students who take specific questions to meetings and who can show evidence of having thought carefully about the issues. Organisation is the key to producing your dissertation on time and without unnecessary stress. Some initial planning should help you to remain motivated and to see that the task is manageable. Work out how many chapters you need to write. Count the number of weeks between now and the deadline. Work out how many weeks you will spend on each chapter, both researching and writing. Leave enough time at the end for proofreading and writing. Try to look at the dissertation as a series of short pieces of work rather than as a 10,000-word whole. Breaking the task down into chunks should help you to do this. You could make a to-do list for each chapter. Break the tasks on the list right down. So, for example, read and make notes on Jones and Thomas article rather than write chapter. Plot these tasks onto a weekly planner and then onto a daily planner. You can collect planners from the Accessibility Centre. Tick tasks off the list as you achieve them. You'll be able to see then that you're making progress. The structure of the dissertation depends on the sort of research that you're carrying out. There are two main types of dissertation. First, there's a project that involves an element of primary research. Primary research is research which involves gathering data of your own, perhaps via interviews or questionnaires that you've designed. Or secondly, There's a project that's based on an extended literature review or theoretical research. This sort of project relies on data that has been collected by other researchers. It's useful when the topic you are studying is very sensitive or the data very difficult to collect. There is a set format for the structure of your dissertation. Always check your course handbook for exact details because each department has slightly different criteria. The broad structure of a primary research project is outlined in the box on the right. More detail about each chapter will be outlined later in the presentation. The suggested word count for each chapter is based on an 8,000 to 10,000 word dissertation. So the dissertation could be set out in the following way. Start with an introduction, which might be between 800 and 1,000 words in length. You could then move to the literature review, which would typically be 1,200 to 2,000 words in length. Next, write the methodology, which might be between 1,500 and 2,000 words. Then you need to include a chapter on the research process if you're in the School of Social Work, which might be between 800 words and 1,000 words. The next chapter is your data analysis chapter, which could be between 2,000 and 2,200 words. You might then have a chapter about your research findings, which would be between 1,000 words and 1,200 words. And finally the conclusion, which is typically between 800 words and 1,000 words. The broad structure of an extended literature review or theoretical research is outlined in the box on the right. The suggested word count for each chapter is again based on an 8,000 to 10,000 word dissertation. And the dissertation could be set out in the following way. Start with an introduction, which is between 800 words and 1,000 words in length. Next comes your methodology, which is between 1,500 words and 2,000 words. You might then have 2 or 3 chapters on specific issues or debates, and these might be between 4,000 and 5,000 words in total for the 2 or 3 chapters. You then might want a chapter on the key themes, which should draw together the key themes from the above chapters, relating them to your research question, and that chapter might be between 1,000 and 2,000 words in length. And finally comes your conclusion, which is between 800 words and 1,000 words. Some departments require students to produce a dissertation plan or proposal before they start writing. Producing a plan or proposal is a good idea, even if it's not a course requirement. It will help you to identify where you're going with the project. The research proposal could be organised in the following way. So start with these statements. This project will consider. The project aims to. The data will be gathered by. These methods were chosen because. Potential problems with the project are, and expected outcomes are. Once you've produced this and shown it to your supervisor, you may be ready to start your research. The next section will describe the purpose of each dissertation chapter and what you need to do before you start writing. The purpose of the introductory chapter is to set out the scope of your research project and to explain how you will go about answering your research questions. This chapter is typically between 800 and 1,000 words. The introduction should describe your topic and introduce the research questions. It should explain the significance or importance of the topic and why you have chosen it. It should also explain the structure of your dissertation by briefly describing the purpose of each chapter. After completing a dissertation plan or proposal, most people begin their reading, and you may already have done some work on this. This is in preparation for writing the literature review. This process is useful because it introduces you to what other researchers are saying about your topic of interest. Undertaking the literature survey could involve meeting with your supervisor to ask for recommended texts. But bear in mind that the dissertation is testing your independent research skills, so you can't expect more than a couple of text recommendations which are designed to start you off. You could also meet with the subject librarian, who will provide advice on possible sources. You could search for books and journal articles via the library catalogue. You could search recommended websites. And you could look at the abstracts for journal articles to decide whether they're relevant before reading the whole piece. If you're unsure about the process of researching and taking notes, you might like to see the presentation called Active Reading, which is at http://connect.le.ac.uk/reading, or the presentation on Making Notes, which is at http://connect.le.ac.uk/making notes. Once this process of literature survey is complete, you can start your literature review chapter. A lot of people write the literature review chapter first. This is a chapter that you can write without having gathered any primary data. Students carrying out an extended literature review will need 2 or 3 literature review chapters. The function of the literature review chapter is to identify the key debates in your research area, which includes the theories or ideas of researchers in the field. It's to evaluate these ideas. Can you see any flaws in the arguments presented? The function of the literature review chapter is also to analyse the assumptions of other researchers. The process of collecting data only applies to students who are carrying out a primary research project. Students who are carrying out an extended literature review will produce 2 or 3 literature review chapters that present what other researchers have found. The data collection for primary researchers can be time-consuming. It needs to be well thought out to avoid collecting more data than you can use. Ask your supervisor for guidance on data collection. Leave enough time to negotiate access to the research site. When interviewing people, make sure you are well prepared for the meeting. Think about how you will record any information that you collect, and set up a system for analysing and storing your data. The methodology chapter is another chapter that can be written early in the process. You can start writing this chapter as soon as you've decided on your data collection methods. The purpose of the methodology is to allow you to justify your chosen research methods. In this chapter, you should state your research question and how it relates to existing literature. You should describe how you will investigate your research questions. Are you using interviews, questionnaires, or diaries, for example? Explain why these methods are suitable in helping you to answer your research questions. Why use these and not other methods? What are the limitations of your chosen approaches? And are there any ethical issues you need to consider? It's expected that your methodology chapter will include references. There are a number of books in the library that cover the strengths and weaknesses of different research methods, and you should refer to some of these in relation to the methods that you have chosen. The research process chapter is only required of School of Social Work students. This chapter allows you to explain how your research changed over the course of the project, and the chapter needs to be between 800 and 1,000 words in length. Most people find that they have to adapt their research methods in some way after the project has started. This chapter should highlight the way the research has developed over time and highlight any key issues to do with the research process that the reader needs to know about. The purpose of the data analysis chapter is for you to outline the results of your data collection. If you have interview data or written survey responses, you may want to select some quotations that help you to answer your research questions. This chapter might be between 2,000 and 2,200 words in length. Explain the results of your research and link the findings to your original research questions. What is your data saying? Link this information to what other researchers have said about your research area. Refer back to your literature review. Make sure that you provide enough evidence to allow your reader to evaluate whether your conclusions are valid. Explain any problems you encountered with the data. The purpose of the research findings chapter is for you to link your data to your research questions and the views of other researchers in the field. This chapter should be between 1,000 and 1,200 words in length. The research findings chapter should explain the specific outcomes of your research project. It should refer back to your research questions and show how the project outcomes address the original questions. If there are aspects of the question that have been difficult to answer, explain the reasons. The concluding chapter should aim to take an overview of the whole project and draw some broad conclusions. This chapter should be between 800 and 1,200 words in length. The following questions may help you to write your conclusion. How has the research project extended our knowledge and understanding of the topic? What key themes have emerged from the project? What are the limitations to the research? And what direction for future research? A dissertation should include a full list of all the sources that have been referred to. Each department has their own referencing conventions. Check your departmental handbook to make sure that you present your references correctly. Some general guidance might be to check the spellings of author names throughout your writing. Check that every reference in the text is in your references list. And remember that each department has specific guidelines on the format of the references, so make sure that you follow these. There are a few elements to a dissertation that are not needed for essays. These are pages for contents, an abstract, acknowledgements and appendices. These are short pieces to write, but you need to devote some time to them once the main chapters are written. The abstract is placed after your title page. This should summarise what you set out to achieve and the main findings of your research. Acknowledgements are placed after the contents page. This is where you thank people who have helped you with the research project. Appendices go at the back of the dissertation. Aim to keep these to a minimum. You might include your interview schedule, but not full transcripts. You will also need a contents page. The next section will offer some general advice about writing the dissertation. Dissertations that score highly will have a well-developed argument. This means that there is a clear sense of direction in the piece. The arguments of other researchers and your own data will be drawn in to lend credibility to your developing argument. Here are some ways to develop an argument. You could agree with or reject the point of view of another researcher or researchers. For example, Smith suggests that, however, his argument does not take account of. You could develop an existing point of view. For example, if Bernstein's ideas about framing are applied to this problem, it is possible to see that. You could come up with a new perspective on a problem or issue, perhaps by applying a new theory or introducing new information. For example, in view of the government's new policy on, the problem can now be redefined as. Developing an argument does involve stating your opinion. The marker is interested in your opinion and wants to hear your thoughts on the research question. However, there are conventions for expressing your opinion in academic writing. You should avoid saying "I think" or "I believe." There are a number of ways of making your opinion clear, but presenting this opinion in a more balanced way. For example, you could use phrases like, "It seems clear from the evidence that," "On balance, the evidence suggests that," "It is not certain that." It is easier to develop an argument if you have some linking words that you can use. These words might also be called signposting words because they indicate to the reader an alternative point of view or a change of direction. The tables to the right show some examples. Words for adding to or developing might include in addition, furthermore, moreover, therefore, or hence. And words for considering other views or evidence might be alternatively, nevertheless, even so, and however. You may find the following books helpful if you're interested in doing some further reading. There's Essays and Dissertations by Chris Mounsey, or Doing Your Research Project by Judith Bell. For more information, you could make an appointment to see a study advisor in the Accessibility Centre. You can telephone 0116 252 5002, email accessable@le.ac.uk, or drop into the centre, which is based on the ground floor of the David Wilson Library. This presentation is part of a series of study skills presentations for dyslexic students that have been produced by the Accessibility Centre. These can be found at www.le.ac.uk/ssds/accessibility. The Accessibility Centre is very interested in your feedback on this presentation. If you have any comments to make, either positive or negative, please email Claire on clg20@le.ac.uk.